Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome to the News in Brief. U.S. President George Bush blames what he calls Ba'ath groups and foreign terrorists for the recent attacks against the coalition forces in Iraq. During a press conference at the White House's garden, Bush said that the coalition forces conducted a successful military operation in Iraq. However, they are still facing great danger, adding that the terrorists' aim is to get the United States and its allies out of Iraq, confirming that this will not happen. Meanwhile, Bush demanded that Syria and Iran increase the patrols on their borders to stop terrorists from illegally entering Iraq, while asking Congress to provide aid for rebuilding Iraq. Now to the Palestinian issue. Israeli special forces assassinated the leader of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in Tul Karam in the West Bank, Ibrahim al-Nanish, also seriously wounding another. Palestinian President Yasser Arafat strongly criticized Israel for continuing to build a separation wall and the persistence of Sharon's government in denying all previous agreements that the Palestinian Authority signed with Tel Aviv under international sponsorship.
This preventative fence, to prevent from what? Their crimes against our people? What is it preventing? He is taking 58% of the Palestinian land in the West Bank and 20% from Gaza. This is historically unacceptable. Is this the Oslo Accord or the Wye River Memorandum we agreed to with Sharon?
Former Moroccan Prime Minister, also the leader of the Socialist Union Party, retired from political life and resigned from his party. Political observers of Moroccan affairs explained that Abdelrahman al-Youssoufi's resignation is in protest to the results of the recent election, where his party lost votes. At least 6 people were killed and others were wounded when a car bomb exploded near a police station in Fallujah, west of Baghdad. Furthermore, unidentified armed men assassinated the deputy mayor of Baghdad, Faris al-Qassam. Meanwhile, the British Army stated that 3 people were wounded in a bomb explosion in Basra. These attacks occurred one day after 43 people were killed and more than 200 others were wounded in 4 violent explosions that rattled the Iraqi capital.
Another day of bloodshed in the country of the Euphrates and the Tigris. However, this time it is in Fallujah, west of Baghdad. On this renewed day of bloodshed, 6 people from Fallujah were killed, including students, when a car bomb exploded near the city's police station. Body parts of at least 6 people were blasted at the explosion site and in the vicinity of a nearby high school, and the ground is covered with pools of blood and body parts. A number of people were also wounded in the explosion, and 7 civilian cars were destroyed or damaged. This explosion occurred after yesterday's suicide operations, killing 43 people and wounding 230 others. A number of Iraqi families are burying their relatives who died in the violent attacks that shook Baghdad, describing it as the most violent and bloodiest operation since the collapse of the previous Iraqi regime. Meanwhile, other families are waiting for the remains of their relatives and loved ones, since the U.S. forces and Iraqi police are still collecting body parts from the explosion sites, where the victims' bodies were blasted all over the area. The explosion also destroyed a number of neighboring houses.
Everything collapsed on my head. I asked what happened. They said we were hit by a missile, and an explosion happened. I looked outside and saw smoke.
Last night, the U.S. forces, supported by helicopters, raided several homes in Baquba, arresting 50 Iraqis and confiscating 12 rifles, ammunition, and a number of Molotov cocktail bombs. Some U.S. officers say that the detained may belong to terrorist cells responsible for the recent attacks in Baghdad. U.S. and British officers added that there are indications that foreign fighters and Saddam Hussein loyalists may be involved in these operations.
We are noticing that the borders are open. and Iraq shares thousands of kilometers with other countries with no border patrol. Foreigners and Arabs from different nationalities are entering.
In response to these accusations, most of the Arab media blame the attacks on the U.S. failure to maintain security in Baghdad, reiterating that the immediate transfer of authority to the Iraqis is the only way out of this U.S. quagmire, which may be difficult to get out of. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, is one of the most prominent war hawks in President George Bush's administration. He was behind the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, relying on a military philosophy created in the wake of the September 11th events. But now this hawk is speaking now as an innocent lamb, claiming that he believes in the logic of reasoning. Rumsfeld contributed greatly to Bush's preemptive strike policy, using military force and war to fight the so-called terrorism. But now he is emphasizing the need to win the war of ideologies in order to win the war on terrorism. Of course, this is not due to a change in Rumsfeld's character or beliefs. Rather, the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq is forcing him to move in that direction.
To understand what is happening inside the American administration, one must look at what is going on in the deserts of Iraq, the mountains of Afghanistan, and other places where the U.S. has intervened militarily under the pretext of a war on terrorism. Political analysts seem to agree that George Bush's preemptive strike policy in the wake of September 11 is facing a major setback, such as the negative impact on the American economy due to the failure in Afghanistan and Iraq.
والتي أرساها بعد أحداث 11 من أيلول قد أصيبت بانتكاسة كبيرة.
These implications seem to be scaring the war hawks more than the peace doves, because the war hawks were the ones who planned, orchestrated, and executed Bush's preemptive strike policy against terrorism.
باعتبار أن هؤلاء الصقور هم المنظرون والمخططون والمنفذون لعقيدة بوش ضد الإرهاب.
This may be why the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was the first man in the U.S. administration to admit that the U.S. may face many challenges in Iraq and Afghanistan for a long time to come. His confession was written in a memo that leaked to the media. Some Republicans speculate that Rumsfeld himself probably leaked the memo.
جاء في مذكرة تم تسريب نصها وربما يكون رامسفيلد نفسه من قام بعملية
A number of Republicans and knowledgeable political analysts say that Rumsfeld is facing increased criticism from the White House and Republican congressmen, as American forces continue to face more difficulties in Iraq, threatening Bush's re-election campaign.
وبين صفوف الجمهوريين في الكونغرس مع استمرار المصاعب التي تواجه القوات الأمريكية.
One defense analyst from the Brookings Institute said that Rumsfeld is becoming a problem for the Republican Party and that he may bear the full legal responsibility for the unfolding events in Iraq. He added that there are doubts about the president's chances of getting re-elected. However, the situation is now more complicated because of the problems in Iraq. Rumsfeld was one of the key players in the national security affairs and foreign policy during Bush's 3 years in the White House. But for the last 3 weeks, Bush has set limits to his influence on the U.S. policy in Iraq and Afghanistan by appointing Condoleezza Rice to coordinate such policies.
الذي كان أحد اللاعبين الرئيسيين في شؤون الأمن القومي والسياسة الخارجية.
Furthermore, Bush was forced to play down anti-Islam comments made by a U.S. general appointed by Rumsfeld to a sensitive position in the intelligence agency in Iraq.
في العراق وأفغانستان من خلال تعيين كوندوليزا رايس لتتولى تنسيق مثل هذه السياسات.
While Bush and others are claiming victories in Iraq, Rumsfeld seems to have personal doubts about achieving success there and in fighting the Al-Qaeda.
رامسفيلد في منصب رفيع في الاستخبارات. وسط هذه الصورة
Rumsfeld is now calling for a very different policy other than the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now he's emphasizing the importance of winning the war of ideologies in order to win the war on terrorism, instead of using military force.
خرج رامسفيلد بعقيدة متناقضة تماما للعقيدة التي خاض على أساسها حربي
In an interview published in the Washington Post, Rumsfeld said that while the U.S. military is confronting direct threats, the U.S. must find ways to prevent terrorists from recruiting new members.
ذلك الفكرة بدل العتاد العسكري. وقال رامسفيلد في مقابلة نشرتها صحيفة
He stated that for every terrorist that gets arrested or deterred by the coalition forces, there are others that are getting trained, adding that in order to win the war on terrorism, we must win the war of ideologies.
من تنظيم صفوفه، مضيفا إن كل إرهابي يعتقله التحالف أو يردعه هناك آخرون يتدربون.
We must prevent terrorist networks from recruiting more people from around the globe. As Bush is facing more difficulties in staying in the White House, Rumsfeld is making a dramatic shift in his policy which may have many implications.
تحول كبير في خطاب رامسفيلد له دلالات وانعكاسات وتداعيات في زمن تتزايد الصعاب في وجه.
However, that does not necessarily mean that the defense secretary may become a victim or an scapegoat, because getting rid of him may have worse implications than keeping him in the Bush administration.
تكون تداعياته أشد وطأة من بقائه.
Today was a day of mourning as hundreds of Iraqis marched in a funeral procession for a child and a youth killed in the deadly attacks. Both victims were among more than 43 Iraqis killed in 5 car bomb attacks targeting the headquarters of the International Committee for the Red Cross and police stations. As the site behind Monday's attacks was still unknown, worldwide condemnations rised, and the U.S. administration urged non-governmental agencies and civilian contractors to remain in Iraq despite the perilous environment.
Debris laid scrambled across the road outside the International Committee of the Red Cross building in Baghdad following a car bomb attack on Monday. The attack was one among 5 attacks on police stations in the capital, which killed some 40 people and wounded more than 200 others. All were Iraqis. Only 1 U.S. soldier was killed and several were wounded. The spree of destruction terrorized the Iraqi capital on the first fasting day of the holy month of Ramadan. The ICRC said that it's considering cutting back its operations in Iraq.
No decision has been taken yet concerning evacuating employees. This kind of decision takes time because it is a hard decision. From the one hand, we are aware of Iraqi needs which we have to fulfill, and on the other hand, we are not ready to lose more of our employees. Anyhow, I don't think that a decision to evacuate the employees would be taken, but a decision to cut short their numbers, and even this kind of decisions has not been taken yet.
Nevertheless, U.S. President George W. Bush claimed the U.S. progress in occupied Iraq and blamed this progress for Monday's violence. Bush's words came after a meeting with the administrator of occupied Iraq, Paul Bremer, and the U.S. military commander there, John Abizaid.
What we're determined in this administration is not to be intimidated by these killers. And as a matter of fact, we're even more determined to work with the Iraqi people to create the conditions of freedom and peace, because it's in our national interest we do so. It's in the interest of a long-term peace in the world that we work for a free and secure and peaceful Iraq. A free and secure Iraq in the midst of the Middle East will have enormous historical impact.
Reacting to reports that the International Committee of the Red Cross said Monday it was considering cutting back its operations in Iraq, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell said their work was needed in the country. He said of contractors, non-government organizations, the ICRC and the UN, that if they are driven out of Iraq, then, quote, the terrorists had won. For his part, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called Monday's attack on the ICRC a crime against humanity. Britain said it will not back down from what it claimed to be the drive to rebuild the oil-rich country. Moscow's foreign ministry said the bombings showed Iraq must be quickly given a chance to form its own government, to take charge of security, and that the United Nations must be given a greater role. France also stressed the importance of restoring sovereignty to Iraqis. U.S. military leaders appeared split on who was behind the attacks. U.S. Brigadier General Mark Hetling told reporters in Baghdad that the 5 bombings bore all the hallmarks of foreign fighters. But later Major General Raymond Odierno, commander of the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division, discounted that theory, saying foreign fighters accounted for only a very small percentage of those fighting the U.S.-led occupation.
In Lebanon, the Islamic Resistance carried out Monday several operations on Israeli military positions in the occupied Lebanese Shib'a farms, hitting back at Israel's recurrent raids on the liberated Lebanese villages in the south. Israeli military sources said that one of its soldiers was injured.
Hezbollah's Islamic Resistance Movement shelled Israeli positions at the occupied Lebanese Shib'a farms and Kfar Shuba hills in southern Lebanon at 3:20 p.m. local time on Monday. Hezbollah's statement said its fighters unleashed a volley of rockets and mortar shells at the Israeli occupation military outposts of Rawaiset al-Alam, As-Sammaqa and Ramtha inside the Shib'a farms area, scoring direct hits. 2 hours later, the resistance movement said it attacked a 4th position at Al-Abbasiyah. The Islamic Resistance said that operations are in retaliation to Israeli raids and shellings which had targeted the outskirts of Lebanese villages. Israeli military sources said that one of its soldiers was hit. Israeli occupation troops failed to hit back at the resistance fighters and instead attacked the outskirts of Lebanese villages with airstrikes and 155mm artillery fire. For 3 hours, Israeli warplanes fired 8 missiles on valleys and mountainous areas on the outskirts of the villages of Kfar Shuba, Hilta, Ibl al-Siqi, Rashay al-Fukhar, Kfar Hamam and Mari. A tank positioned at Ad-Dahra post close to Al-Abbasiyah village shelled Al-Majidia farm as warplanes hovered overhead. Israel blamed the latest exchange of fire on Syria and Iran, saying it would retaliate with severity to more attacks.
Yeah, that's another example of the entire northern system being directed and pushed and financed by the Iranians, by the Syrians. It's another example that the Lebanese government is doing nothing about its responsibility according to 425 resolution, which Israel fulfilled absolutely. We talked about it in the earlier days, and unfortunately we got another example today. Even though that we would like to see stability in this area, if those kind of attacks will happen again, and if this trend, I would say, of potential escalation will not stop, at the end of it, I guess that we'll have to retaliate, and then that will be a very severe one.
The U.S. State Department called on Syria and Lebanon to press Hezbollah to stop resistance operations against Israeli occupation posts. Spokesman Richard Boucher said the United States asked everybody in the region to maintain calm along the border. The UN coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Tyrod Larson, condemned the operation, saying Lebanon must exert full control over the use of force from its territory. He urged all parties to exercise maximum restraint and respect fully the blue line. The United Nations drew the blue line between Lebanon and occupied Palestine following the Israeli withdrawal in May 2000 from major parts of southern Lebanon after 22 years of military occupation.
Israeli Channel 1 television has specialized one of its programs to talk about Hezbollah, the power that manifests a unique phenomenon that disturbs Israel. The program also talked about the role of Manar channel and a new radio station, which excelled in the psychological war they launched against Israel.
Hezbollah is still an issue that upset the Israeli public opinion, whether as a resistance movement, as a political party, or as a media and social institution. Whenever any of the many topics related to Hezbollah is evoked, the sweeping defeat Hezbollah inflicted on the Israeli occupation troops in southern Lebanon surfaces in the Israeli memory. Questions are posed behind the secret of the power of this party that is still defeating Israel, that disdained the Arabs to the extent that it ignored their existence. A talk show broadcasted by Israeli Channel 1 reflects ongoing Israeli concern over Hezbollah.
For Hezbollah, the struggle means above all expelling Israel from Lebanon. Hezbollah has a basic principle in his ideology, which is to wipe out Israel, and when they say it, they mean it.
Hezbollah is really a unique phenomenon. No other organization or state does pressure on the Israeli Security Institute as does Hezbollah. It daily disturbs the institute. Hezbollah is active on the broad line and provides the Palestinians with weapons, funds, men, and military training. It also has its agents among the minorities in Israel. What mostly disturbs Israel is Hezbollah's power balance, manifested by the tens of thousands of Katyusha missiles based even at the Haifa Bay. This forces Israel to pause and rethink every time it considers of getting involved in Lebanon.
It goes without saying that whenever Israeli media tackles Hezbollah, the words are ever so elaborate on the personality and characteristics of its Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. They helplessly acknowledge that he is the first leader to disclose their weaknesses.
A little focus on the captivating and attractive personality of Nasrallah.
According to me, Nasrallah is almost the first leader in the region who demasked our weaknesses in southern Lebanon. He lobbied via the Four Mothers and many other means on which he banked. His victory thus went behind liberation. As for the negotiations on prisoners, he is very accurately playing with various threads, including media. He knows when to talk and when to remain silent.
Israeli television views Manar channel and An-Noor radio station as central tools used by Hezbollah to influence the Arab and international public opinion. According to the Israeli television, the psychological war they launch against Israel is as effective as the missiles and armed fighters.
Nasrallah realized by far more than any other leader in the region the important role electronic media can play in this war against Israel.
Which Israeli cabinet was willing to hold direct talks with Nasrallah?
Israel believes that Nasrallah is qualified for dialogue. But the problem is that he does not see us fit for that. He does not recognize our existence. He does not have any problem in wiping us out, and he had worked hard to achieve that goal.
Israeli Occupation Forces arrested a number of Palestinians during a raid campaign into Yatta in Hebron and arrested citizen Ali Jabril Abu Samra after searching his home. Sources at the dini club in the city said that Israeli military force raided ICE area south of Hebron, broke into the home of the detainee Azzat Shweiki and arrested his two sons Abdul Qadir and Akram, while his third son had been arrested since last year. In Nablus, Israeli occupation troops continued tightening their siege on the city, where they closed Al-Hawara roadblock on the southern entrance of the city, warning the citizens from approaching it after firing tear gas canisters toward them. The troops also arrested two citizens after breaking into a number of homes at Ras Al Ain neighborhood and the old town of Nablus and took them to an unknown location. The troops also broke into Bazaria village west of Nablus, searched many homes and imposed a curfew on the village. A contingent of Israeli occupation troops rolled on Tuesday into Rafidia and Al-Makhfiya areas and An-Najah National University and opened their heavy machine gun toward the citizens and their homes. More than 1,000 citizens, meanwhile, who are returning back home, were stranded at Rafah crossing point due to tough Israeli measures, which allows the entry of only few passengers to the Palestinian territory since the past 4 days, Egyptian border sources said. Under the directives of President Arafat, a financial grant was dispersed on 276 families affected by the last incursion on Rafah Governorate. Governor of Rafah, Majid Agha, said that the grant was offered respect to His Excellency's keenness to alleviate the daily suffering of the affected families and in line with the chain of financial assistance called by His Excellency to be distributed one by one on the owners of the raised homes. The governor who distributed the grant at the governor's premises pointed out that President Arafat gave his orders to disperse these urgent assistance to all the families whose homes were recently destroyed in Yibna, Al-Barahmi, Lish'ut, Block J, Salam and Brazil refugee camps. The Ministry of Detainees and Released Detainees held the Israeli government and the prison administration fully responsible for the life of detained child Arakan and Sayrat, 12 years old, from Jericho Governorate. In a press statement, the ministry voiced its serious concern toward the detention of the child Sayrat, who is the youngest prisoner inside Israeli prison and who is suffering from inhumane detention conditions. The ministry also called on all international human and legal organizations to immediately intervene to release the child and all the Palestinian detainees without any restriction or discrimination.
Israeli military sources refuted Palestinian allegations about launching a missile at a car near Nasriyat camp in Gaza, killing civilians, saying that those who were killed were terrorists from the Hamas movement. For the first time, the Israeli military decided to air images about the incident to prove their point. A series of airstrikes launched by the Israeli Air Force in Nasriyat camp in Gaza generated a lot of controversy. The Palestinians claimed that the airstrikes targeted a populated area, which compelled the Israeli defense and air forces to air video footage to refute the Palestinian allegations. The footage clearly proves that no civilians were killed. The incident, which generated a lot of controversy, started when an Israeli defense unit fired on Hamas terrorist members when they left their car near Mahl Hus village. The video was captured by an unmanned plane, revealing that when the car drove through the area, it was hit by a missile launched by a helicopter that was monitoring the car. One can say that when the vehicle was hit, the driver of the vehicle lost control. A second later, the car appears on the screen. Less than 2 minutes later, the helicopter launches another missile. At the time, there were no more than 3 people who may have been hit by a shrapnel. After watching the footage, one notices that the ambulance arrived to the scene and people started crowding the area. At the time, the helicopter stopped firing. Military sources confirmed that the Palestinian allegations are not true. The ones that were killed were terrorists from the Hamas movement, which can be proven beyond doubt by these images.
Is not seeking atomic weaponry and is even concerned of the proliferation of mass destruction weapons. President Khatami made the remark Tuesday in a meeting with the visiting former German President Richard von Weizsäcker.
Wondering why only Iran is under pressure for its peaceful nuclear activities while Israel's atomic arsenal draws no global concern, Mr. Khatami denounced any politically motivated and biased attitude in this regard. President Khatami also noted to win the global trust, Iran agreed to sign to the Non-Proliferation Treaty Additional Protocol once the country's security, sovereignty, and national dignity are safeguarded. However, as he added, reciprocal abidance by the commitments on the other side of the deal is expected. Former German president, in turn, cited accession to the nuclear technology for civilian purposes as what Iran deserves to acquire. Mr. Weizsäcker expressed delight over recent talks between Tehran and the 3 key European foreign ministers in a move to resolve the existing crises and accentuated reciprocal measures to be taken in that respect. The former German president concluded by saying the step taken by Tehran to sign the additional protocol had not only removed global concerns over Iran's nuclear activities, but also elevated the European Union's responsibility to revamp political and economic relations with Tehran.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.